You ever watch someone get the Holy Ghost? When you're a kid, it is really scary to watch, but it's also liberating. Sometimes it was like watching a volcano explode. The person's so full of the Spirit, they kind of tumble down the church aisle to the waiting arms of our pastor. Other times, it was like a quiet surrender. Big fat tears streaming down their faces, their arms reaching towards the sky. More than anything as a kid, I wanted to feel what that was all about. Mostly because there is nothing quite like the joy and pride of a Black family watching your salvation. The other day, the Truth Be Told team got to talking about our church memories, and our editor James told us about the time he got baptized.
It wasn't my decision. I remember one day being told by my parents that I was going to be baptized, and days later, along with a handful of other preteens, I was dunked in a small, light blue plastic wading pool hidden behind the pulpit.
James is originally from the Chicago area, and he was one of those kids who basically lived in church.
Mainly because my dad was an ordained minister. But even though our family spent so much time there building community, I never really felt a part of it. Most of the time, I felt alone.
His father taught him to be leery of what he called worldly people. And as James got older, he started to resent that way of thinking because he felt different. On this episode of Truth Be Told, is it possible to be queer, love the Lord, and feel acceptance from the community that made you? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Our dilemma this week comes from Truth Be Told editor James T. Green.
In my early 20s, I started to question what it meant to be a man and how it didn't match up with how I felt inside. But it went against everything I learned in the church. I had no one to talk to. I spent a good chunk of my life afraid.
James now uses both he, they pronouns. He has come into who he is. But James still wants to feel the love and connection that comes from being accepted. And James also wants to be fearless. So to help with their dilemma, we called up someone who has been showing us how to stand firmly in who we are for more than 50 years.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. This is Nikki Giovanni. I agree with a part of that.
Nikki Giovanni has never been afraid to question anything, including the Bible.
If you keep records of rights, then you have to keep records of wrongs.
So it's not really surprising that she'd have some questions about Corinthians 13, the verse that is read at weddings and funerals and is taught as the Christian way of relating. And that is through love. Nikki says from the time she was a girl, she was always observing, trying to discover things that no one else had thought of. And one discovery she made early on that charted the course of her career as a poet was observing the ways that we as Black people show love. And that is through our faith and our food.
Because every Saturday, you'd have the community would come together and people would cook. You'd have, your ham, and grandmother usually made fried chicken or something, and you had your greens. So it was always a picnic.
In the 1960s, Nikki quit grad school at Columbia University and followed her desire to write. Poet of the Black Revolution, that's what one critic called her. Arriving to the national stage on the heels of the civil rights movement, Nikki had a strong militant perspective. Over the last 4 decades, she's written more than 36 poetry collections and children's books, and also recorded several albums. Her first one in 1971 with the New York Community Choir, titled Truth is on Its Way.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was death, and the Word was nigger, and the Word was death to all niggers, and the Word was death to all life, and the Word was death to all peace. Be still.
A radical poet backed by a gospel choir. People had never heard anything like this. The first recorded fusion of gospel with the spoken word. Two languages articulating the same struggle.
Well, I've always thought, of course, that the spirituals had a message. They weren't just that some people woke up, one morning or came in from working in the evening and said, "Oh, let's sit down and sing." They were sharing information to each other.
Childhood remembrances are always a drag if you're black. You always remember things like living in Woodlawn with no inside toilet. And if you become famous or something, they never talk about how happy you were to have your mother all to yourself, and how good the water felt when you got your bath from one of those big tubs that folk in Chicago barbecue in. And somehow when you talk about home, it never gets across how much you understood their feelings as the whole family attended meetings about Hollydale. And even though you remember, your biographers never understand your father's pain as he sells his stock and another dream goes. And though you're poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And though they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everybody is together, and you and your sister have happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me, because they never understand black love is black wealth. And they'll probably talk about my heart.
That always gets me, because they never understand that black love is black wealth. Well, what does black wealth look like for James? Before we get to their dilemma, Nikki and I talked about what black wealth looks like for her today, and we pick up the conversation with one of Nikki's favorite subjects.
You know, I want to ask you about your grandma's greens too, because I know that you said that you've spent a lifetime trying to get that recipe down. I'm the same way. I cook greens every Sunday, and every Sunday I fall short. They're good enough, but they'll never have that taste.
There's something those old ladies did. I don't know. They smiled, or it was something they did that you and I, or they said please, or something that you and I aren't doing. But what I remember, and I'm sure you do also, is you had to cook your ham hock the day before, and then it went into the refrigerator and it cooled. And I think that was one of the things, because you and I were busy, and so we end up putting the ham hock in with the greens and cutting everything, and cooking it all at the same time. And I think that might be one of the things that we're missing, is that patience that they had to wait.
Man, that patience is so true. Even with New Year's Eve and with black eyed peas, when you realize, oh, I've got to soak them for 24 hours before we actually get to the cooking.
Yeah. Black eyed peas, and of course chitlins. And I really like chitlins, and I'm always surprised again that I talk to young people and they say, "Ooh, I wouldn't eat chitlins." I said, if your great grandmother and father didn't eat chitlins, you wouldn't be here. That's what helped us to survive. Now I'm getting hungry for chitlins, and quite delicious. And you do that with your cornbread. What more do you want?
Right. I know. You got to have the cornbread, and you've got to have a good cornbread recipe. That's for sure. I had the pleasure of listening to both of your gospel albums from 1971 and 72, Truth is on the Way and Like a Ripple on a Pond. We got our son a record player for Christmas, and so it's just been so fun to do that. And I know that those both were recorded by the New York Community Choir, and they were just reissued back in November to mark the 50th anniversary. It is a riveting listen. It feels like going back to church, really, like you are sitting in a church. And it also feels subversive because we're hearing your poetry about things like misogyny and white supremacy up against these traditional gospel classics. Did it feel that way at the time? What was the purpose? Why did you want to bring your poetry to this sensibility of the church and a choir?
Well, I've always thought, of course, that the spirituals had a message. They weren't just that some people woke up, one morning or came in from working in the evening and said, "Oh, let's sit down and sing." They were sharing information to each other. And you have to remember, when they were enslaved, they were not allowed to read or write. So there were not going to be any books being passed. The slaves did not have any books to pass. So the only way that they could tell each other what was going on is going to be through song. So for me, growing up in the church, and I just love the spirituals, I've always loved them, that's the music that's going to build the music that everybody hears now. No matter where you are on planet Earth, you will hear Black American music. So you can be in China and you've got kids in China who are rapping, which is unbelievable, but that's the truth. And poetry is a part of that talking. You're into electronic communication, which allows you to talk to thousands of people as far as you want to. There was a time that you and your stories would not travel very far. You'd go from one maybe plantation to the next plantation. But somebody, because they were buying and selling us, we got to tell the story that we heard where we were, what our grandparents said, or what our mother or what our father told us. And as we moved along, we did that with the food, and we did that with the stories.
You know, Nikki, these spans of time and the things that have happened over time are so important to talk about and reflect on, because with every new generation, they need to know why what's happening is happening, the significance of it. You know, the last year, we've been having this ongoing conversation about the parallels between 1971 and now, marking that 50 years. Do you see the parallels to then and now?
I think, and I don't mean to be positive, I don't mean to be joyful or anything like that, but I think that there's been a lot of progress. And I think that we in the Black community have raised our voices. And I think that that's what's really, really important. And in doing so, we have to give Martin Luther King Jr. credit for that, because Martin and John Lewis, who deserves a lot of credit, and people do give John a lot of credit. A lot of people, we've lost a lot of people. We really have. But we've also changed the country.
Music is also a big foundation for you. I read that your latest book of poetry, Make Me Rain, was in part inspired by Marvin Gaye's 71 album, What's Going On, the cover. It's so foundational to who we are because it speaks life, as you said, it breathes life into our experience.
There's, when everything goes wrong, that's what you do. You sing a song, you hum a song. No matter what it is, your mother dies. My good friend Linda Dixon's mother just passed, and that's what you do. You find a song and you just keep humming that song, because you have things to do, and you've got to bury your mother. When my mother died, Mommy's been dead now for 14 years, and Mommy died, and then my sister died 3 weeks after that. Mommy died in June. My sister Gary died in July, and my aunt Ann died that October. So it was don't. So that was one of the things. I had a job to do, and the job that I had to do, because I couldn't be selfish and just mourn, I had to bury people. And there are other people who had to bury people. So you do that, but the way that you can handle it is through song.
You know, what you're saying here is really resonant with the dilemma that we have today that we want to talk with you about. But I want to ask you about something before we get to that you said at the top of our conversation, and that your memories of church were that it was a community. It was the same for me growing up in the heyday. I grew up Baptist, and the church that I grew up in, Detroit, Michigan, it was the center of the universe. I mean, it was packed every Sunday. It was civically and politically engaged, youth groups, elder groups. My church even helped me pay for college. But now it's just a shell of its former self, and it feels like that's the case for many Black churches today. From your view, has the quote-unquote Black church lost its relevance?
Yes. How about that for a quick answer? Yes, I think it has. That You got a church that's got a couple of thousand people in it. It's not a church, it's a corporation. And they send you a note, and they send you an envelope, and you're supposed to put your check in it, like you do for the Wildlife Association, or like you do to save the dolphins or something. I'm very disappointed in the church. And these big, and it's like, oh, I have a big church and then I have a big car and I'm important. And you think, oh, yeah. And if I'm sad, if I'm having a difficulty, if my kid is in some level of trouble at school, who do I turn to?
But Nikki, how do you reconcile that? You said how you're a woman of faith and you have strong faith. And at the same time, this moral center that we used as a place that was kind of the grounding and the foundation of who we are is no longer that place. What is that place now for us? And how do you reconcile that as a person of faith?
No, for me, I still have that faith. But for me, I have the people, and I mentioned that earlier, the people I love and the people that I respond to. So I have, as I said to you, and when we hang up, I'm going to call Linda because her mother just died. And I know what it's like. Everybody has this pain in the same way. And what you do as a friend, as somebody, and I've known Linda forever, what you do is just say, I'm here, and I just wanted to call. Because there's nothing, it's not going to be all right. And if there's anything you hate in the world, is that you're going through something incredibly painful, like losing your mother, your father, or for that matter, your dog. And somebody calls and say, oh, you'll get over it. No, damn it, you won't. It will not be all right. It will be something that's always with you. So anybody who loves you is just going to say, well, I love you. I'm here. I love you. And let it go. If they drink, which I always recommend champagne, then you'll go and take a good bottle of champagne, none of that cheap crap. And you'll take a good bottle and you'll open it up and sit down. And you got nothing to say because there's nothing to say. But you're there. There's nothing to say, but you do go over and you sit down at the kitchen table, because I'm a Black woman, so there's nothing like a kitchen table. You sit at the kitchen table and you pour yourself a glass of champagne and shut the hell up.
But this is such a hard time, Nikki, because we also don't have that mechanism of connection because of the pandemic. I think a lot about so many people who have lost so many people during this time, myself included. And the first thing you want to do is get in the car and go over there, and you can't do it.
Well, I'm not a fan. I've had my shots. I've had my booster shot. I wear my mask when I go out, a lot of things. But I'm not a big fan of, if I am needed someplace, somebody who I don't know says it's dangerous. Because what I know that is dangerous is not to be there when somebody you love needs you. That's what I know to be dangerous. And I'm not looking, I didn't go to Toni Morrison's funeral because I couldn't bear the idea of seeing her in a casket. I just couldn't bear it. I've known Toni and I've loved Toni. We are close friends, and I just couldn't bear it. But it wasn't because I was afraid that I'd catch something. Because whatever it is that's out there is beating us up anyway. Somebody said, "Oh, we have to fight this virus." You can't fight a virus. You have to find a way to live with it. So I wake up. I have cancer, and my left lung has been removed because of cancer, and then now my right breast has been removed. And I always laugh at, and it's something I talk about because it's true. I'm just so glad it was my left lung and my right breast, because it keeps me, balanced. If it had been all on one side, if it had been my left lung and my left breast, I'd be, I wouldn't be able to stand up straight. But this is keeping me balanced. So I if Jesus and I have a bit of a conversation, I said, well, I appreciate the fact that you balance this out, but I'm not fighting cancer. And I hear people talk about that. Oh, you have to fight this. I know better than to fight cancer, because cancer is going to win. So I'm saying to cancer, hi, good thing to see you. Yeah. Good morning. I hope to see you tomorrow. Because otherwise, if I'm fighting cancer, I'm going to lose. I'm not going to fight. I just want to live with it.
And what I also hear from you is that when it comes to faith and your relationship with the Black church, it's about your personal relationship with God and not the institution of, quote unquote, the Black church.
Well, it's my relationship, and I'm not against God, but it's my relationship with Jesus, because I think he was a good guy. And I think if you read the New Testament and you read with some thought about who this guy was, Jesus. So whatever his relationship to God was, I'm glad. But my relationship is he did the best that he could do. So my job, if we're going to be friends, is for me to do the best that I can do. And I'm not preaching today because it takes too long to do this on a podcast. But see, I never believed that Jesus died for my sins or anybody else's. I think that Jesus died to show us, don't worry about it. See, I'm up here on the cross. Death ain't nothing. Don't worry about it. I'll be there. Don't worry about it. And they got everybody scared of death. And Jesus like, no, don't. I'm here showing you death ain't nothing. Because you will, as he said to the man on his left, you will be with me in heaven. I doubt that I will, because I hate people, and there are things that I doubt that I'm probably going to go to hell. But I do always say, I hope I can get, a day pass and go up and talk to my mom every now and then. I got some friends in heaven. But I think that Jesus on the cross was saying, death ain't nothing. Don't worry about it.
Are you not afraid of dying?
I would prefer not to right now. But if you say afraid, no, because it's got to happen. I have to die. I was born. If you were born, you're going to die. If I get a call and it's like, hi, Nikki, this is God. You're always talking, I need you up here in heaven. We got a situation. I need a poet, so I'm going to have to ask you to come on up. It's nothing for me to say, but okay. Phone rings, I have to answer it. No, it's illogical to be afraid of the inevitable.
Wow. I mean, that's powerful. At the same time, we live our lives, number one, being afraid of death and trying to do everything we can to stay alive, trying to be healthy, trying to be safe. And then also living our lives in a way that we feel is Christ-like, because we don't want to go to that place called hell. And so to hear you speak about this in the way that you feel, like in a joking way, hey, I may be in hell. I just want to be able to say hi to my mom sometimes. And also like, I'm living life to my fullest. And yes, death is just as much a part of life as life. I mean, that sounds like freedom and liberation in its rawest form to me.
I think that it's so important that you be in control of knowing what's important to you. So a lot of things that people care about, I couldn't care less. And a lot of things people have to say about you or not you, but one. But then there's that wonderful spiritual. You see, we're back to that. It says, I've been buked and I've been scorned. I've been talked about. Sure as I'm born. But I ain't going to lay my religion down. No, children. I ain't going to lay my religion down. And it's fabulous. Because it frees you from worrying about what somebody thinks about you. Because who gives a damn? You don't know these people.
Well, let's get to our dilemma this week, and it comes from our own editor, James T. Green. James identifies as non-binary and uses he, they pronouns, and I want to bring him into the conversation.
How do you feel about the gender binary, and how has binary thinking affected our growth as Black people?
What does that mean?
I feel like being identified as male or female doesn't necessarily fit for like how I feel for myself. It feels like I'm kind of stuck in the middle, like there's no definition. And it feels like, especially because like I do present as a man, I feel like sort of society, like the societal expectations of manhood and like manliness doesn't necessarily fit with how I feel to be as a man.
Okay. Well, I'm a space freak. So in dealing with space, I thought, well, if I run into a life form and they say, who are you? I need to tell them I'm an earthling. I couldn't tell anybody, well, I'm a Negro or I'm black. It has no meaning. I'm agreeing with you that it has no meaning that whatever my so-called gender is. I can't go into Jupiter and say I'm a woman because they said, well, what's a woman? And I don't know if you saw the movie, which I love so much, called Downton Abbey. And you remember that Robert's nephew is now going to come, right? And so when he comes and they all meet him, the Duchess, and I love the Duchess, she was so wonderful. And she was saying, well, how are you going to learn to run Downton Abbey? And he said, I'll always have the weekend. And the Duchess looked over and said to Robert, what's a weekend? She didn't know. Queen Elizabeth doesn't know. What's a weekend? It's not something that made any sense to people. She didn't know. And so we now know, or we're beginning to understand, it won't make any sense to say I'm a man or a woman.
I mean, Nikki, when you put it like that, it does, in the context of like the universe, right? Speaking to an alien, what a human is, what a man, what a woman, what it means to be black. Like it all does feel so ridiculous under that context.
Sure. So you have to assume that you were somehow, and that's just arrogance on everybody's part. You were chosen, and I wouldn't say to bear the burden, but the light has been shined on you to make some of the difference. And the same way that the enslaved had the light shine on them to say, we're going to be free, we know that some of the slaves ran away. And that's a good thing. Frederick Douglass ran away. Harriet Tubman ran away. That's a good thing. But we also know, and I have such a respect and a love for them, some of them stayed. And they were not cowards. They were not afraid. They said, we're going to build where we are, right here. And they stayed, those who stayed. And so we end up getting the 13th Amendment. I think that's really great. Somehow you have chosen, or you have been chosen, to make another step for human beings. It's a step for the future. It's not a step for the past. And so you have to say to yourself, oh, I've been chosen. And I will find my community, because there is a community. And we know that. I teach in a university. We know that there's a future coming where gender is insignificant. I think it's a fabulous thing. It's a lot going on. And it's more than I probably won't live long enough to know enough. But I know that it is the future. You just have to be aware that you are part of the future, that you're not a part of the past where we had these stupid definitions. And right now you're fighting with it and saying, what's wrong with me? I bet you 90%, what's wrong with me? And there's nothing wrong with you. You just haven't understood what's right.
So I was also raised in the church. And when I mean raised, like my moral compass was like established by like the Baptist congregation. Like my dad was a minister. And I was reminded of this recently when my grandmother passed and I had to fly back home. And I was in the front row as the pastor delivered the eulogy. And, he was praising my gran for her service to the church community. But as I was sitting in that front row, it was interesting because like I felt both at home, but also like a complete alien. I felt like the most uncomfortable that I felt in years. And I knew that because I knew that there were plenty of congregation members that would not accept my identity as a non-binary person. So, my main question for you is like, how can you show love and demonstrate love for a community that has raised you, but, does not accept you or others like you?
Well, I'm sure some people in those churches you don't like. And if you like them all, something wrong with you. You're not paying attention. Because a lot of those people are crazy. And a lot of those people look for somebody to be mean to. I was very close to my grandmother. And like all people, my mother died, you sit on the front row. I don't really care what other people think about me. I don't see why we get involved. I don't see why you care what any of those people. They probably didn't know your grandmother. They probably, saw her and Miss so and so, Miss James' grandma, he's always trying to do something, always trying to help somebody out, because there are people that say things like that. How come she's always the one stand up and say, well, I'll help? And you've heard that. If you haven't heard that, you haven't been to church. But you've heard it. And that's a fool. And see, we're back to Jesus. And when Jesus was on the cross, the first thing he did, it's always been interesting that Jesus was in the middle of these two men. It was always interesting to me. I don't know if you thought about it. Because he could have been on one side or the other. But he wasn't. He was in the middle. And on that cross, he looked over to the man on his right. And he tried to comfort that man who was on the cross, who was going to die. And that man said, yeah, you say you God, but you up here just like us. And this is why I like Jesus so much. He knew a fool when he saw one. And we can look through the whole New Testament and see that. And he just looked at that man and he thought, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm here to do a job. I'm not going to waste my time on this fool. And he turned to the man on his left, who said to him, I do believe you are God. And Jesus said to the man on the left, you will be with me today in heaven. And I think you just have to always keep that in mind. If you see a fool, you have to go, that's a fool. Click. Otherwise, you're always upset because you're always feeling you're not doing something right. And you can't let that happen.
Nikki, does that also mean in some cases, James turning his back or moving away from the institution of the church? Because when I hear James's question, I hear him saying, like, I'm sitting in something that feels so familiar, that community that you and I were talking about early on, that we grew up in and we experienced. If he turns his back, in many ways, that means he's turning his back on that type of experience.
See, there's no mistake. There's no, in my opinion, James, I don't know if I'm being helpful here, but there's no such thing as a mistake. The woman you're there to bury, to put into the everlasting arms of Jesus, they got some attitude about. You're not there for them. You're there for that woman. You do that job and you thank everybody because you don't give a damn. You have good manners. And you thank everybody for coming and you shake hands and you get back on a plane and go back where you came from because none of them people mean nothing to you. And you say, well, I'll never find a church. Well, maybe not, but you'll always find a Bible. And so you get yourself a King James version and you sit down and you read it. And you sit there and you try to think, and what does this mean? I'm always amazed that that so many people that they don't know have something to do with their lives. Because somebody loves you. I don't know you, but somebody loves you. And if nobody loves you, get a t-shirt made. I need love. Call James. You'd be surprised how many people call you, hey, James, I love you.
Well, I will say, Nikki Giovanni, that we love you. And you've got a new album out now with saxophonist Javon Jackson called The Gospel According to Nikki Giovanni. I can't wait to get into it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It really has been a pleasure. And I sang Night Song for Nina. For Nina Simone. She's a good friend. Summer, not a bitter breeze. Neon signs are shining through the tired trees.
As I mentioned earlier, Nikki is a prolific writer, so you can always follow her through her work. Her latest poetry, Make Me Rain, is now out on paperback. But there's one place you won't find her.
Nikki, is it really true you have no social media and you don't do email? Is that really true or an urban legend?
Yep, that's true. I don't know these people. Why should I let them, one, take up my time, and two, influence me?
After our amazing conversation with Nikki Giovanni, the Truth Be Told team made up of James, Aisha, Ayana, Rochelle, and myself got on a Zoom call to talk about the wisdom we just received.
Okay, so James, what a conversation. How are you feeling?
I felt like I got like 3 years worth of therapy in that entire conversation. And I really feel like I'm going to really stick with what she was telling me about not only like loving myself, but also making sure to, I guess, keep everybody else's noise out of my own self, you know?
Yep. I mean, in my head all day, it's going to be, you don't know these people. That's just going to be what I'm thinking about. What about you, Aisha?
So something that really stood out to me is when she said, I don't mean to be joyful or positive, but there's been a lot of progress since 1971. And I think it's important to hear from someone who was actually there in 1971 and existed before then to tell us and remind us that things have improved. It may feel bad now, but it has actually gotten better.
Rochelle, what are you thinking?
It really just struck me how at peace she is with where her path has taken her. Like, she's chosen this path, she's gone down this path through her life, and you can tell that she is just completely at peace with how she moves through this world. And I aspire to be that way one day.
Ayana.
So for me, having experienced death more closely in the last couple years, all of her insights on death were so comforting to me, because as you get older, you start to have a more intimate relationship with people's passing. Mm-hmm. And when she said, there's nothing to say to a person who's grieving, just be there, that felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders, because you never know what the expectation is for you to say or do.
Yep, I know. That was really powerful.
And yeah, Ayana, and like that really got me thinking a lot about like how we were having all conversations about community and just like essentially wanting to be there around like the people that really mean the most to you. And I don't know, I'm definitely going to try to keep that, not only with like showing love for others around me, but also like for myself.
We all need to get I Need Love, Call James t-shirts. That's just going to be an Urban Outfitters. I feel like that's a cultural moment.
It is. Look, that's for real.
Truth Be Told is a production of TMI Productions and is produced by Ayana Angel, Aisha Brown, James T. Green, and Enrico Benjamin, in collaboration with Molten Heart and in association with Fearless Media. We're distributed by DCP Entertainment. Our theme music is Rest by Otis McDonald and Zora's Moon by Candace Hoyes. Special thanks to our administrative coordinator, Rochelle Roberts, Taylor Lee for our overall look, and my cousin Rashid Lattimore for the dope artwork in our logo. He produced our previous logo too. He's an amazing artist, and you can check out his IG at Akeem Rahim. And thank you to Heising Simons and the Ford Foundation for funding Truth Be Told. I'm Tonya Mosley.